Hello there. In this video, I want to introduce you to the new Code of Professional Conduct. The accounting profession has entered the electronic age. As you know, we got rid of the quill pens and the paper ledgers, etc., and pretty electronic. And the AICPA has decided to do the same thing with the Code of Professional Conduct. So in the summer of 2014, it created a new electronic version that becomes effective for the most part December 15th, 2014. The conceptual framework, which we'll talk about quite a bit, becomes effective 1 year later. The features of this new electronic version of things are pretty cool. It's searchable, it's easily updated, and I have to say, since it came out, they're updating it almost every month, which can get a little bit confusing, but that's the story. And you've got the website right there on your screen. You're going to want to go and look at that from time to time because it will be changed from time to time. And it's divided up into these various parts. It's got a preface, which is called Part 0, which is sort of odd. And Part 0 divides the code into three major parts, which are, to some extent, copied off of the IFAC code, the International Federation of Accountants Code of Ethics, in that it's now organized along the lines of the functions of the various things that accountants do. So you've got in Part 1, members in public practice. I'm going to call them MIPS, M-I-P-P-S, but those basically are folks who do attest work. And that is the biggest part by far. Much smaller are MIBs, members in business, and then very small are other members, which I'm going to call OMs. It's possible that as an accountant you might work across multiple functions here, and if so, you should always use the strictest rules that apply to you. So, to continue a little bit with the introduction, the preface, keep in mind that we've got principles and rules which are set out in the code. They're supplemented by interpretations. We've got about 50 new definitions in the electronic code and then indications of applications. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that the code is always supplemented by the standards that come out from state CPA societies, SEC, of course, PCAOB, GAO, and etc. This is something that's not a change from the old code. And I should say, I think the new electronic code is a big change in the way things are organized, a smaller change in substance, but there definitely are substantive changes to keep in mind. But the 6 overarching principles of the AICPA, of the profession, are the same. There's the responsibilities principle. And that says that in carrying out their responsibilities as professionals, members should exercise sensitive professional and moral judgments. Sensitive is a code word. It means be concerned with appearances and how your actions look. The code adds now that members should cooperate to improve the art of accounting, maintain the public's confidence, and carry out the profession's special responsibilities for self-governance. Now, frankly, you kind of blew the self-governance thing back in the Enron era. The accounting profession was largely self-governed up until Enron and all the scandals that happened around there. That created Sarbanes-Oxley, and Sarbanes-Oxley largely eliminated the self-governing part of the profession. Nonetheless, the AICPA still wants you to strive to improve the profession, to act as professionally as possible, and that remains a key. So, overall concept number 2, called the public interest principle. It says that members should accept the obligation to act in a way that will serve the public interest, honor the public trust, and demonstrate a commitment to professionalism. Again, very high-sounding words, but those have been words that have been part of the code for a long time, and the AICPA really means them. As part of this principle, the code goes on to say that a distinguishing mark of a profession is acceptance of its responsibility to the public. At least back before the CPA test went confidential, that was often an answer on a CPA quiz, so keep that concept in mind. Third overarching principle is the integrity principle. The code says to maintain and broaden public confidence, members should perform all professional responsibilities with the highest sense of integrity. And again, this has been supplemented in the new code. It says integrity is measured in terms of what is right and just. And I like that. That's a good way to keep these things in mind. And it also says members should always ask, am I doing what a person of integrity should do? As someone who teaches ethics, I like that. I think you should ask yourself that a lot in your professional life and ask yourself that a lot in your personal life. The objectivity and independence principle is also a key. It says a member should maintain objectivity and be free of conflicts of interest in discharging professional responsibilities. A member in public practice should be independent in fact and appearance when providing auditing and other attestation services. So remember, again, appearance is important. You may know that your heart is pure and your cause is just, but other people may not know that. So it's always important to keep in mind that you have to look like you are doing the right thing to third parties, as well as striving to do the right thing inside your own head. Objectivity is important, and sometimes they like to ask you if you know the elements of objectivity, and in the eyes of the AICPA, it is that you're impartial, that you're intellectually honest, and that you're free from conflicts of interest. As you know, independence applies only to people who are in the attestation branch, so it applies only to MIPS. Everybody, whether you're doing audits or compilations, or you're in tax, you're in consulting, you've got to act with integrity. No matter what role you serve as an accountant, you've got to act with objectivity. But only those doing attest-related actions need to worry about independence. But they've got to be worried about independence in fact and independence in appearance. The due care principle says that a member should observe the profession's technical and ethical standards, strive continually to improve competence in the quality of services, and discharge their professional responsibilities to the best of their ability. Keep in mind always that perfection is not required. Nobody has to be Mr. or Ms. Super Accountant, but you are expected to live up to the society, to the AICPA's standards, to the profession's standards. Competence requires a commitment to continued learning. Tax rules change. Audit principles change, and you've got to keep up to date with those things. That's why we have continuing professional education for the profession. Competence means you know your stuff. And it's great if you know your stuff whenever a client walks in the door, but obviously really complicated issues can come up from time to time, and so competence can come not only from what you know day to day, but also research that you do, or consultation that you might do with experts. So it doesn't mean you're not competent just because you don't know the answer to a question when one of your clients walks in the door. We always ask you to act with due care, and that entails adequate planning of engagements and supervision of professional responsibilities for which you are responsible. So keep in mind that due care has, as part of it, not just knowing your stuff, knowing your tax rules and knowing your audit procedures, but it also means that you can plan your engagements well, because if you can't do that, all the technical knowledge in the world doesn't do you any good. And it also means that sometimes you're responsible for those people around you, the staff who are under you and those folks who are working with you, and that comes up over and over again in the Code of Professional Conduct. The final overarching principle deals with the scope of services and says a member in public practice should observe the principles of the Code of Professional Conduct in determining the scope and nature of services to be provided. That's actually a pretty vague concept and hard to know what it means until you look at the specifics, which say that at a minimum, members should practice in firms with good internal quality control procedures. So again, key thing to keep in mind, don't just know your stuff. Make sure you're in a firm with good technical procedures so everybody around you is doing things in the right way. Use your individual judgment to determine whether the scope and nature of services provided to an attest client would create a conflict of interest. Again, nobody's going to know better than you whether or not you've got a conflict of interest. There's a large amount of self-policing that needs to go on here. And finally, you should assess whether a contemplated activity is consistent with your role as a professional. As I mentioned, the new electronic code contains 50 or so definitions, some of which are new. As I go through these videos, I'm going to talk about the ones that I think are important when I think they're important. But just to give you an example, one of the new ones is the definition of a partner equivalent, which is defined as someone who is not a partner, but who has either ultimate responsibility for the conduct of an attest engagement or the authority to bind the firm to conduct an attest engagement. Normally it's a partner who does those things, who signs off on an attest engagement, or who binds the firm to do an attest engagement. But sometimes somebody may not be a partner in a firm, but still has that authority. Well, if they've got that authority, then they need to live up to the same standards that a partner would have to live up to.